I'm 82 years old and just discovered my children have been slowly poisoning me to speed up their inheritance, so I changed my will and now they're panicking. My name is Robert Harrison and I'm 82 years old. I built Harrison Manufacturing from nothing 40 years ago, turned it into a company worth $30 million, and I've spent the last year slowly dying. At least that's what I thought until 3 weeks ago when I discovered the truth. I live in a large house in Westchester County, New York. The kind of house that looks impressive from the outside with its colonial architecture and manicured lawn, but feels empty once you're inside. My wife Margaret died 6 years ago from a heart attack. One moment she was gardening, the next she was gone. The doctors said it was quick. I'm not sure if that made it better or worse. After Margaret died, I rattled around this house alone for about a year before my daughter Catherine suggested I might want some help. She said I was getting older and it would be good to have someone around in case of emergencies. I'd resisted at first because I'm not the type of man who likes admitting he needs help with anything. I'd built a manufacturing empire, raised 3 children, survived the recession of 2008, and never once asked anyone for a handout. But Catherine was persistent. She's always been persistent. She's 54 years old, my oldest child, and she inherited my stubborn streak along with my green eyes and sharp chin. She works as a real estate attorney in Manhattan, makes good money, drives a Mercedes, wears expensive suits. She's divorced, no children, lives alone in a condo that probably costs more per month than most people make in a year. My son Michael is 51. He's my middle child and the one who was supposed to take over Harrison Manufacturing. I'd groomed him for it since he was a teenager, sent him to Wharton, brought him into the business at 25. But Michael never had the hunger for it. He's smart enough, charming enough, but he lacks the killer instinct you need to run a company. He's content to coast, to let others do the hard work while he takes credit. He's been the chief operating officer for 15 years and the company has stagnated under his leadership. My youngest is Thomas. He's 48 and he's always been the disappointment. He went to art school against my wishes, spent his 20s trying to be a painter in Brooklyn, never sold enough to support himself. I cut him off financially when he was 30, told him it was time to grow up and get a real job. He did, eventually. He works as a graphic designer at some tech startup, makes decent money now, but he's never forgiven me for not supporting his art career. All 3 of my children are mentioned in my will. Equal shares of everything. $10 million each. Plus the house, which is worth another $3 million. I'd set it up that way after Margaret died because despite their flaws, they're my children. My blood. The people who are supposed to care about me when I'm old and dying. Except they weren't just letting me die. They were helping it along. It started about a year ago. I began feeling sick. Nauseous all the time, dizzy, weak. I'd wake up in the morning and barely have the energy to get out of bed. My doctor ran tests. Blood work, imaging, the whole battery. Everything came back showing I was declining, but nothing specific. He said it was probably just age catching up with me. The body breaking down. It happens to everyone eventually. Catherine had hired a live-in nurse by then. Her name was Patricia Delgado. She was 53, Filipino, came with excellent references. She'd worked for a wealthy family in Connecticut for 8 years before the husband died and the wife moved to Florida. Patricia was professional, quiet, efficient. She cooked my meals, made sure I took my medications, helped me when I needed it but otherwise stayed out of my way. I liked her well enough. She reminded me a bit of Margaret in some ways. She had that same calm competence, that ability to anticipate what I needed before I knew I needed it. She'd bring me tea in the afternoon without me asking. She'd lay out my clothes in the morning in combinations that actually matched. Small things that made life easier. As I got sicker, Patricia became more essential. There were days I could barely make it down the stairs. Days when the nausea was so bad I couldn't eat anything. Days when my vision would blur and I'd have to sit down before I fell down. Patricia was always there. Always ready with a hand to steady me, a cool cloth for my forehead, words of reassurance that this was normal for someone my age. My children visited regularly. Catherine came every Sunday for dinner. Michael stopped by on Wednesday evenings. Thomas came on Fridays. They'd started this routine about 6 months ago, said they wanted to make sure I was doing okay and that Patricia was taking good care of me. I'd been touched by their concern at the time. They'd all 3 sit with me in the living room, ask about my health, look concerned when I described my symptoms. Catherine would pat my hand and tell me to be strong. Michael would remind me I was tough, I'd beaten worse than this. Thomas would sit quietly and nod, never quite meeting my eyes. Then they'd talk to Patricia in the kitchen. I could hear them sometimes through the walls, their voices low and urgent. They'd ask her about my condition, about what I'd eaten that day, about my medication schedule. Patricia would answer in that same calm professional voice, reassuring them that she was following the doctor's orders exactly. The doctor had prescribed me various medications. Blood pressure pills, cholesterol medication, a daily aspirin, vitamins. The usual cocktail for a man my age. Patricia organized them all in a weekly pill organizer, the kind with separate compartments for each day. She'd hand me the pills every morning with breakfast and every evening with dinner. I'd swallow them without really looking because why would I? They were prescribed by my doctor. They were helping me. Except they weren't helping. I kept getting worse. By month 8 I could barely walk from the bedroom to the bathroom without getting exhausted. My hands shook constantly. My stomach hurt all the time. I'd lost 30 pounds. I looked like a skeleton. Catherine suggested hospice. She said it was time to think about making me comfortable in my final days. She said this with tears in her eyes, sitting beside my bed, holding my hand. She said she loved me and didn't want to see me suffer anymore. I'd almost agreed. I was so tired. So sick. The thought of just letting go, of finally resting, was appealing. But something stopped me. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the fact that despite feeling terrible, I wasn't actually dying of anything specific. All the tests showed I was declining, but there was no cancer, no organ failure, no clear cause of death waiting around the corner. I told Catherine I wasn't ready for hospice yet. She'd pressed me on it, said I was being difficult. Michael had backed her up the next time he visited. He said hospice wasn't giving up, it was being realistic. Thomas had just nodded along like he always did. But I'd refused. And I'd started paying more attention. I'm not a stupid man. I built a $30 million company from nothing. You don't do that without being observant, without noticing patterns, without trusting your instincts when something feels off. And something was feeling off. Patricia was wonderful. Too wonderful. She never complained, never took a day off, never seemed tired despite working 16-hour days. She'd brush off my questions about herself, redirect conversations back to me, maintain this perfect professional distance. I'd known her for a year and I knew almost nothing about her beyond her name and that she'd worked for the family in Connecticut. My children's visits had become too routine. Too scheduled. They'd arrive at exactly the same time each week, stay for exactly 90 minutes, follow the same pattern. Living room conversation with me, kitchen conversation with Patricia, back to living room for goodbyes. Like they were checking items off a list. And I'd started noticing that I felt worse after their visits. Particularly after Catherine's Sunday dinners. She'd started bringing meals with her, saying Patricia shouldn't have to cook on the weekends. She'd bring these elaborate dishes, casseroles and roasts and stews, and serve them with such ceremony. She'd insist I eat everything because I needed to keep my strength up. Then I'd spend Sunday night and Monday morning violently ill. 3 weeks ago, on a Sunday evening after Catherine had left, I was lying in bed feeling like death. My stomach was cramping, my head was pounding, and I couldn't stop shaking. Patricia had given me my evening medications and brought me water. She'd told me to rest, that these episodes would pass. After she left my room, I'd lain there in the dark thinking. Remembering conversations. Noticing patterns. And for the first time in a year, I'd let myself think the thought I'd been avoiding. What if someone was making me sick on purpose? It seemed insane. Paranoid. The kind of thing a delusional old man thinks when he's losing his grip on reality. But once I thought it, I couldn't unthink it. I waited until Patricia's footsteps faded down the hallway. Then I got out of bed, moving slowly because the room was spinning. I went to the bathroom and locked the door. I'd taken the evening pills from Patricia, but I hadn't swallowed them. I'd tucked them under my tongue instead, an old trick from my army days when we'd wanted to avoid medication during basic training. I spit the pills into my hand and looked at them under the bathroom light. There were 4 pills. I recognized 3 of them. The blood pressure medication was blue and oval. The cholesterol medication was white and round. The aspirin was small and orange. But the 4th pill was pale green and oblong. I'd never seen it before. I wrapped all 4 pills in tissue and hid them in my medicine cabinet behind my shaving cream. Then I went back to bed and pretended to sleep when Patricia checked on me an hour later. The next morning, I felt slightly better. Not great, but better than I'd felt in months. I told Patricia I didn't want breakfast, that my stomach was upset. She'd looked concerned and offered to make me toast and tea. I'd accepted the tea but said no to everything else. She brought me tea in a china cup on a tray. I thanked her and waited for her to leave. Then I poured it down the bathroom sink. By Tuesday evening I felt better than I'd felt since this whole nightmare started. My head was clearer. My hands weren't shaking. The constant nausea had faded to a dull background sensation instead of the overwhelming wave that usually consumed me. I'd skipped my evening pills by pretending to take them and spitting them out later. By Wednesday morning, I could walk down the stairs without holding the railing. Patricia commented that I seemed better. I told her I'd had a good night's sleep. Michael visited Wednesday evening like always. He'd brought dinner from this Italian place I used to like. Veal parmesan, pasta, salad. He'd served it himself, making a production of it, saying the restaurant had made it special just for me. I'd eaten about half before claiming I was full. Michael had looked disappointed. He'd encouraged me to eat more, said I needed nutrition. I'd refused, said my stomach couldn't handle it. He'd stayed for exactly 90 minutes and left. I'd felt sick about an hour after he left. But not as sick as usual. And I'd had the presence of mind to save my vomit in a plastic container that I'd hidden in my closet. I don't know what made me do it. Instinct, maybe. The same instinct that had made me successful in business. Thursday, I pretended to be more ill than I was. I'd stayed in bed, refused food except the tea Patricia brought me, took the pills she gave me but spit them out as soon as she left. She'd called Catherine to update her. I'd heard her voice through the bedroom door saying I'd taken a turn for the worse. Catherine had arrived within an hour. She'd sat beside my bed, held my hand, looked at me with such genuine concern that I'd almost felt guilty for suspecting her. She'd asked if I wanted her to call the doctor. I'd said no, I just needed rest. She'd stayed for 3 hours. Much longer than her usual visits. She'd helped Patricia prepare dinner. I'd heard them talking in the kitchen, their voices too low for me to make out words. When Catherine finally left, she'd kissed my forehead and told me she loved me. I'd felt nothing. Friday, Thomas had come. He'd brought flowers and a book he thought I might like. He'd sat in the chair beside my bed and read to me for an hour. A spy novel, something with international intrigue and double crosses. The irony wasn't lost on me. He'd stayed for exactly 90 minutes like always. Before he left, he'd gone to the kitchen. I'd heard him talking to Patricia. He'd asked her something I couldn't quite hear and she'd responded. Then he'd come back, said goodbye, and left. By Friday night, I'd collected 6 pills in my medicine cabinet. 2 sets of the green ones I didn't recognize. Saturday morning Patricia had her day off. She left at 9 to visit her sister in Queens and wouldn't be back until Sunday afternoon. It was the one day a week I was truly alone in the house. As soon as her car pulled out of the driveway, I'd gotten dressed. Really dressed, in slacks and a button-down shirt, not the pajamas I'd been living in. It took me longer than it should have. My hands were shaky and my coordination was off. But I managed. I'd taken the pills I'd collected and put them in a small envelope. Then I'd called a car service. I'd briefly considered driving myself, but I hadn't been behind a wheel in 6 months and I didn't trust my reflexes. The car had taken me to the medical lab my doctor used. I'd walked in and asked to speak to someone in charge. The receptionist had tried to tell me I needed an appointment. I told her I was Robert Harrison and I'd donated $50,000 to this clinic last year and I needed to speak to someone immediately. Money talks. It always has. The lab manager had come out within 5 minutes. Her name was Dr. Sarah Chun. She was maybe 40, efficient looking, wearing a white coat over business casual clothes. I'd handed her the envelope with the pills and told her I needed them tested. I told her I needed to know what they were and I needed the results immediately. She'd started to explain their normal procedures, their timelines, their protocols. I'd cut her off. I told her I'd pay whatever it cost for rush processing. I told her I suspected someone was poisoning me and I needed confirmation today. Her expression had changed. She'd asked if I'd called the police. I'd said not yet. I'd said I needed proof first. She'd taken the pills to the back. I'd waited in her office for 3 hours. I declined her offer of water or coffee. I just sat there, my mind running through scenarios, through possibilities, through the evidence I'd been gathering without realizing I'd been gathering it. Dr. Chun had returned with a printout. She'd sat down across from me and explained what they'd found. The blue pills were indeed blood pressure medication. The white pills were cholesterol medication. The aspirin was aspirin. But the green pills were arsenic trioxide. She'd said it carefully, watching my reaction. She'd explained that arsenic trioxide was used in some cancer treatments in very controlled doses. But the amount in each pill was approximately 10 times the therapeutic dose. And given daily, it would cause exactly the symptoms I'd been experiencing. Nausea, vomiting, weakness, tremors, confusion. She'd asked again if I wanted to call the police. I'd said not yet. I'd thanked her, paid for the testing with my credit card, and asked her to keep this confidential. She'd looked uncertain but agreed. The car had taken me home. Patricia's car still wasn't in the driveway. I'd gone straight to my bedroom and locked the door. Then I'd sat on my bed and tried to process what I'd learned. Someone was poisoning me with arsenic. Someone who had access to my pills. Someone who wanted me to die slowly enough that it looked natural. Patricia was the obvious suspect. She handled all my medications. She had the opportunity every single day. But Patricia had no motive. She was being paid well, yes, but not well enough to risk murder charges. And she'd have nothing to gain from my death. My children, though. My children had everything to gain. $10 million each. Plus the house. Plus the company, which Michael would presumably take over completely once I was dead. But would they really do this? Would my own children, the babies I'd held when they were born, the kids I'd raised, would they really poison me for money? I'd spent Saturday night lying awake thinking about it. Remembering things. The way Catherine had pushed for hospice. The way Michael always brought food himself instead of letting Patricia cook. The way Thomas could never quite look me in the eye during his visits. The pills had to be coming from one of them. Patricia was just following orders, probably not even knowing what the green pills were. Someone had to be giving them to her. Someone who told her they were part of my prescription. Sunday morning I'd pretended to be my usual sick self when Patricia returned. I'd stayed in bed, groaned appropriately when she checked on me. I'd taken the morning pills she brought and spit them out later. 2 of them were the green ones. Catherine had arrived at 4 with Sunday dinner. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans. She'd served it in the dining room, the 3 of us sitting together like a normal family. Patricia had eaten with us, which was unusual. Catherine had insisted, said Patricia worked too hard and deserved to join us. The food had tasted fine. I'd eaten slowly, paying attention to every bite. Nothing seemed off. Nothing tasted bitter or strange. But I knew arsenic was tasteless. That was the whole point. After dinner, Catherine and Patricia had gone to the kitchen. I'd followed slowly, pretending to need my walker. I'd positioned myself near the doorway where I could hear them clearly. Catherine had been asking about my medication schedule. Patricia had explained when I took what pills. Then Catherine had lowered her voice and said something I'd had to strain to hear. The green ones need to be twice daily now. Doctor's orders. Morning and evening with food. Patricia had agreed. Said she'd make sure I took them with meals from now on. I'd shuffled back to the dining room before they caught me listening. Catherine had left at 5:30, kissing me goodbye, telling me she loved me, reminding me to eat everything Patricia made for me. After she left, I'd confronted Patricia. I'd asked her about the green pills. Where did they come from? Who prescribed them? She'd looked confused, said they were part of my prescription from Dr. Morrison. Catherine had brought them 3 months ago when Dr. Morrison had added them to my regimen. I'd called Dr. Morrison right then and there. Sunday evening, I'd called his cell phone, the private number he'd given me years ago for emergencies. He'd answered, sounded concerned when I identified myself. I'd asked him about the green pills. He'd had no idea what I was talking about. He'd said he hadn't prescribed any new medications in over a year. He'd said if there were green pills, they weren't from him. Patricia had gone pale. She'd started apologizing, saying she didn't know, that Catherine had told her they were prescribed. I'd told her it was fine, it wasn't her fault. But I'd also told her she was fired and needed to leave immediately. She'd packed her things and left within an hour. She'd been crying, apologizing, saying she'd only been trying to help. I'd almost felt bad for her. Almost. Once she was gone, I'd locked all the doors and sat in my study. The same study where I'd built Harrison Manufacturing. Where I'd made the decisions that had created $30 million from nothing. Where I'd planned strategies and outmaneuvered competitors and built something that was supposed to last beyond me. My children were trying to kill me. Not just one of them. All 3. They had to be in it together. The timing of their visits, the coordination with Patricia, the way they'd all pushed for hospice. This was a conspiracy. I'd spent Sunday night planning my response. By Monday morning, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I'd called my lawyer first thing Monday morning. His name is Martin Breslow and he's been my attorney for 30 years. He's 75, still sharp as ever, retired from his big firm but maintains a small practice handling matters for old clients like me. I'd told Martin I needed to see him immediately. I'd told him it was about my will. He'd cleared his schedule and I'd had a car take me to his office in White Plains. Martin's office is in a professional building near the courthouse. Wood paneling, leather chairs, Walls covered with degrees and certificates. The office of a man who's been practicing law since before I started my business. I'd sat across from Martin and told him everything. The poisoning. The arsenic. Patricia. My children's involvement. He'd listened without interrupting, his expression growing more grave with every detail. When I finished, he'd been quiet for a long moment. Then he'd asked if I'd called the police. I'd said no. He'd said I should. I'd said I would, but not yet. First, I wanted to change my will. Martin had pulled up my current will on his computer. The one that split everything 3 ways between Catherine, Michael, and Thomas. He'd asked me what I wanted to do instead. I'd told him. He'd looked at me for a long moment and then nodded. He'd said if that's what I wanted, he'd draft it immediately. We'd spent 3 hours going over every detail. Every clause, every provision, every contingency. When we were done, Martin had printed out the new will. I'd signed it. He'd had his secretary and paralegal witness it. It was legal and binding. I'd gone home that evening feeling more energized than I'd felt in a year. The house was empty without Patricia. I'd made myself dinner. A sandwich. Nothing fancy. But I'd made it myself and I'd eaten every bite and kept it down. Tuesday morning I'd woken up early. I'd felt almost normal. The fog in my head had cleared. My hands barely shook. I'd showered, shaved, dressed in proper clothes for the first time in months. Then I'd started making phone calls. I'd called Catherine first. I told her Patricia had quit unexpectedly and I needed to discuss hiring a replacement. She'd sounded concerned, said she'd come over that evening to talk about it. I'd called Michael next. Same story. He'd said he'd come by Wednesday evening. I'd called Thomas last. He'd said he'd come Friday as usual. I'd spent Tuesday cleaning up. Going through the house, throwing out the medications Patricia had been giving me, airing out rooms that had been closed for months. I'd felt like I was reclaiming my space. My life. Catherine had arrived Tuesday evening at 7. She'd been surprised to see me up and dressed. She'd commented that I looked better. I'd said I was feeling better. Much better, actually. We'd sat in the living room. I'd offered her tea. She'd accepted. I'd made it myself in the kitchen, brought it out on a tray. She'd looked impressed, said it was good to see me being independent again. I'd asked her about Patricia. Why she'd brought the green pills. What she'd told Patricia they were for. Catherine had gotten very still. She'd set down her teacup carefully. She'd asked what I meant. I'd told her I knew about the arsenic. I told her I'd had the pills tested. I told her I knew she'd been poisoning me. She denied it immediately. She'd said I was confused, that I was having delusions, that the illness was affecting my mind. She'd tried to take my hand, to comfort me like I was having a mental episode. I'd pulled away. I told her I had proof. Laboratory results. Documentation. I told her I'd spoken to Dr. Morrison. Her expression had changed then. The concern had dropped away and something colder had taken its place. She'd asked what I wanted. I told her the truth. I wanted to know why. Why would she do this? Why would my own daughter try to murder me? She'd laughed. Actually laughed. A bitter, harsh sound. Then she'd told me. She'd told me about the resentment that had built up over decades. About how I'd always favored Michael, groomed him for the business while dismissing her accomplishments. About how I'd told her law was a fine profession for a woman, but never took her seriously as a successor. About how when she'd asked to join Harrison Manufacturing after law school, I'd said the company wasn't the place for family drama. She'd told me about her divorce 10 years ago. How her husband had left her for a younger woman and taken half her assets. How she'd asked me for help, for a loan to tide her over, and I'd refused. I'd said she made good money and should have been more careful with her finances. She told me about watching me give Michael chance after chance at the company despite him being mediocre at best. About watching me cut off Thomas but then giving him money under the table when he asked, thinking no one would notice. About feeling invisible to her own father unless she was useful. She told me the inheritance wasn't even about the money. It was about finally getting what she deserved. About making me pay for a lifetime of dismissing her. About taking control of the company that should have been hers. I'd listened to all of it. Then I'd asked about Michael and Thomas. Were they part of this? She'd hesitated. Then she'd nodded. She'd said Michael had come to her a year ago worried about the company. I'd been making noises about selling it, about liquidating everything and donating the proceeds to charity. Michael couldn't let that happen. He'd spent his whole life at Harrison Manufacturing and he needed it to survive. Thomas had joined them because he needed the money. His design job paid well, but not well enough. He had debts. Gambling debts, Catherine had said. Significant ones. The kind that get people hurt if they're not paid. The inheritance would solve all his problems. So they'd planned it together. Slowly poison me over the course of a year or more. Make it look natural. An old man declining, his body finally giving out. No one would question it. No one would investigate. Catherine had hired Patricia specifically because she'd be easy to manipulate. A foreign nurse working in the country, dependent on her work visa, unlikely to question orders from the family. Catherine had told her the green pills were a special medication from a specialist. Patricia had never thought to verify it. I'd sat there listening to my daughter explain how she and my sons had conspired to murder me, and I'd felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a cold clarity. I'd told Catherine she should leave. She'd asked what I was going to do. Call the police. Press charges. I'd said I was still deciding. She'd stood up, straightened her suit, picked up her purse. Then she'd looked at me with that same cold expression and said I should think carefully about my next moves. If I went to the police, I'd be tearing the family apart. Michael would lose the company. Thomas would probably be killed by his creditors. Was I really willing to destroy my own children over this? I'd told her to get out of my house. She'd left. I'd sat in the living room for a long time after she was gone. Then I'd called Martin and told him to proceed with the next phase of the plan. Wednesday morning I'd received 3 phone calls. First from Michael, canceling his evening visit because something had come up at work. Then from Thomas, saying he couldn't make it Friday because of a project deadline. Then from Catherine again, saying we needed to talk and could she come by that evening instead. I'd agreed to Catherine coming over. I'd spent the day preparing. Reviewing documents. Making sure everything was in order. Catherine had arrived at 8, 2 hours later than she'd originally said. She'd been agitated, pacing my living room, asking if I'd made any calls to the police. I'd told her no. Not yet. She'd relaxed slightly. Then she'd sat down and told me we needed to reach an understanding. She'd said if I kept quiet about what they'd done, if I let things continue as they were, she'd make sure I was comfortable for whatever time I had left. They'd stop the poisoning. They'd let me die naturally. But the inheritance would stay as written. I'd told her that wasn't going to work for me. She'd gotten angry then. She'd said I didn't have a choice. If I went to the police, I'd die knowing my children were in prison. If I tried to change the will, they'd fight it on grounds of mental incompetence. Either way, I lost. I'd smiled at her. Then I'd told her I'd already changed the will. Last Monday. Before she even knew I'd discovered the poisoning. Her face had gone white. She demanded to know what I'd done. I told her she'd find out soon enough. She'd left shortly after that. Threatened me on her way out. Said I'd regret this. Said I'd be sorry. I'd locked the door behind her and felt nothing but relief. Thursday morning Martin had called to tell me everything was filed and recorded. The new will was official. I'd thanked him and asked him to proceed with the final step. Thursday afternoon Catherine, Michael, and Thomas had all received certified letters from Martin's office. Notifications that my will had been changed and they were no longer primary beneficiaries. The letters didn't explain what the new will contained, just that they'd been removed. Catherine had called me within an hour of receiving hers. She'd been screaming. Demanding to know what I'd done. Who was getting the money now? What had I told the lawyer? I'd told her she'd find out when I died. However long that took now that she and her brothers weren't poisoning me anymore. Michael had shown up at my house that evening. He'd been more controlled than Catherine, but just as angry. He demanded to see the new will. I'd refused. He tried to reason with me, explain how the company needed him, how I was making a terrible mistake. I'd told him the company would be fine. Better than fine probably, once he was no longer running it into the ground. He'd left after threatening to have me evaluated for dementia. I'd told him to try it. I just had a full cognitive assessment as part of changing my will and passed with flying colors. Thomas had called Friday morning. He'd been crying. He'd begged me to reconsider. He'd said he was in real trouble with the gambling debts. He'd said people were going to hurt him if he didn't pay. He'd said he knew what he'd done was wrong but he was desperate. I'd told him he should have thought of that before trying to kill his father. Then I'd hung up. Friday afternoon all 3 of them had shown up together. They'd stood in my living room, Catherine in her expensive suit, Michael in his business casual, Thomas looking haggard and afraid. They'd presented a united front. Catherine had done the talking. She'd said they were prepared to make a deal. They'd confess to everything, go to therapy, make amends, whatever I wanted. But I needed to change the will back. The company needed to stay in the family. The money needed to go to them. I'd told them no. Michael had tried next. He'd appealed to logic. He'd explained how Harrison Manufacturing employed 200 people. How those people depended on the company for their livelihoods. How selling it or leaving it to someone outside the family would put all those jobs at risk. I told him those jobs had been at risk for years under his mismanagement. Thomas had just stood there crying. He'd said he was sorry over and over. Said he'd made a mistake. Said he loved me. I told him if he'd loved me, he wouldn't have poisoned me. They'd left together. I'd watched them from the window, standing in the driveway, arguing. Catherine had been gesturing angrily. Michael had been pacing. Thomas had just stood there with his head down. That was 6 days ago. Since then, they've each tried different approaches. Catherine has sent lawyers to threaten me with lawsuits. Michael has tried to turn the board of Harrison Manufacturing against me. Thomas has sent me dozens of text messages begging for forgiveness. I've ignored all of it. I've been busy getting my affairs in order. Meeting with Martin. Meeting with my accountant. Meeting with the private investigator I hired to gather evidence of my children's conspiracy. Because I haven't called the police. Not yet. I have evidence of their attempted murder. Laboratory results showing arsenic in the pills. Patricia's testimony about Catherine bringing the medications. Documentation of their visits and the correlation with my symptoms. But I'm not sending my children to prison. Despite everything they've done, despite the fact that they tried to kill me, they're still my children. I can't do that to them. Instead, I'm doing something worse. The new will leaves them each exactly $1. The house will be sold and the proceeds donated to charity. The company will be sold to a competitor who's been trying to buy us out for years. My entire estate, all $30 million of it, will be divided among various charities. Medical research. Education funds. Museums. My children will get nothing. And they'll have to live with that for the rest of their lives. They'll have to live knowing they murdered their father for money they'll never see. They'll have to live with the guilt and the knowledge that everyone will eventually know what they did. Because I'm also leaving behind a full written account of everything that happened. To be opened and read at the reading of the will. Every detail of their conspiracy. Every conversation. Every piece of evidence. It won't be enough to prosecute them criminally. I'm making sure of that by not filing a police report while I'm alive. But it will be enough to destroy their reputations. To make sure everyone knows what they did. Catherine will lose her legal career. No one wants an attorney who tried to murder her own father. Michael will never work in manufacturing again. The story will follow him everywhere. Thomas will be known forever as the man who killed for gambling debts. That's their punishment. Not prison. Something worse. Public knowledge of what they are. I'm writing this all down now, 3 weeks after discovering the truth, because I want there to be a record. I want people to know what happened. I want my children to know that I knew, that I understood, and that I made sure they'd pay for it. I'm 82 years old. I might have 10 years left, maybe more now that I'm not being poisoned. But however long I have, I'll spend it knowing I won. I outmaneuvered my own children. I turned their murder plot against them. I made sure justice was served, even if it's not the kind that comes from a courtroom. My name is Robert Harrison. I built an empire from nothing. And I'll be damned if I let my ungrateful children destroy it for their inheritance. This is my story. This is my truth. And when I die, naturally this time, the world will know what Catherine Harrison, Michael Harrison, and Thomas Harrison